Hello, Lisa here. If you feel like you do something at night when you go to sleep and you wake up in the morning and it's like, oh gosh, I did something, more than likely you have. We consider that you work for the army of the Lord or you're working for the army of the bad guys. Either way, I'm trying to talk to you. These theorems are based on Dolores Cannon's work, reading the Bible, and my own personal experiences. This is for Thursday, Thor's Day. We're going to be talking, I'm going to read this book from the Haarp, chapter 2. The chapters aren't very long, and then I have a little bit of stuff to show you that Spirit wanted me to share. So, chapter 2, we're going to get right into it. Trail from Tesla to Star Wars. After she returned home to Vancouver, Manning reported to a new friend who wanted to hear about the Tesla conference. He was John Hutchinson, an inventor who had discovered an anomalous anti-gravity effect some years earlier while he had been restoring antique electrical equipment and building Tesla coils. During the previous years, unofficial delegations from Canadian and United States military groups had visited his laboratory to see the Hutchison effect. Now he was working alone. The visitors had apparently learned all they came to learn. His requests for copies of the videos they filmed in his laboratory were met with, sorry, we destroyed all those videos because there wasn't anything on them. He didn't believe it. John Hutchison told Manning some of the amusing twists of his search for reports about his own experiments. I was phoning the Pentagon and asking for John South because I was told that was the name of one of the guys who were here in my lab. By chance, a secretary put me through to a man I described, and it turns out his name was Colonel John Alexander. The name would come up again more than 5 years later as Manning gradually found out what else could be done with Tesla technology. So-called non-lethal weaponry. John Hutchinson described Colonel Alexander as a handsome, personable man who was a fun guy to be around throughout the days of the anti-gravity experiments in the Vancouver laboratory. Hutchinson had the leisure time to chat with Manning in a now silent laboratory. He shared Tesla lore about beamed weaponry and told her that the Soviet Union was mysteriously experimenting with radio frequency signals, beaming them toward North America. Beginning in late 1976, he had been one of the many radio operators who began picking up the 10 hertz cycles, beats or pulses per second, frequencies on radio receivers. Hams called these signals the Soviets' woodpecker, because the sharp tapping they heard from the extremely low frequency ELF waves. Some researchers speculated that the woodpecker signal was a Tesla type weapon for mind control, because the ELF was at a frequency which could resonate with neurons in the human brain. And the transmission could be a carrier wave that was modulated, varied in amplitude, frequency, or phase, to carry a hidden effect. Spooky, she joked, dismissing what seemed to be a paranoid speculation. Manning learned more about Nikola Tesla 2 years later after another symposium in Colorado Springs. One of the papers in the proceedings of that meeting was by a historian and psychology professor, Dr. Mark Seifer. She would recall it years later when learning about unpublicized experiments in lighting up the upper atmosphere. Seifer gave Tesla credit for inventing fluorescent lights, just as the revered American inventor Thomas Edison in the inventor of the incandescent light bulb. The biographer notes that Tesla and Edison clashed over Edison's insistence that the country should stick to his direct current DC technologies for electrical lighting and power distribution. Tesla's AC system was better because AC electricity can travel hundreds of miles over power lines at high voltage, while a wire carrying DC would be unable to light bulbs a mile away from the generating plant. Strangely, Edison was the one who was lionized in American history books. One of the stories that is told and retold, for example, is how he sent men to the Amazon to look for materials for the best filament for his light bulbs. Edison's persistence is highly praised. However, most people today are unaware that Tesla's demonstration showed the filament to be superfluous, not needed for electrical lights. Using very high frequencies, increased vibrations of the electrical current, he showed that the action of the air was more important than the filament, and thus he out-Edisoned Edison, said Dr. Seifer. Seifer pulled together parts from 53 reference works in his presentation, Nikola Tesla, The History of Lasers and Particle Beam Weapons. For an example of Tesla's research, two brothers, both scientists, traveled to the Tesla Museum in Yugoslavia and read materials not available in North America. They suggested that Tesla particle beam work evolved from his pioneering experiments with X-rays, as well as from his idea of lighting up the skies with his magnifying transmitter by beaming up electrical energy to the stratosphere, a level of atmosphere above the clouds about 7 to 31 miles above the ground. That would be some light-up display, Manning thought as she read the article. However, she wondered about the wisdom of treating the upper atmosphere as if it were merely gases in a giant fluorescent bulb. Yeah, I have to say something about fluorescent bulbs. When you sonic resonance, for anybody who's out there and can hear, as if you have, I don't know if the hearing with the resonance is for everybody or you just have special skills for that. But when you dynamically, quantumly attach to certain people out there and they get put in an institution or in jail or they're hospitalized or something and there's fluorescent lights around, you can hear those lights. So you know, oh, so-and-so's in jail again, or so-and-so's in a mental hospital again, or in an just say an institution, because they really could be in school or something like that, because schools have those lights. But fluorescent lights make a very specific sound in the resonancing world. I'm just putting that out there. Since she winced as she read a list of military uses for Tesla's many inventions: earthquake contrivances, world radar, particle beam weapons, and brain wave destructive impulses through the earth to any location. Now I'm going to read that again because I think that's important. Brain wave manipulation. One or more magnifying transmitters could theoretically send well-placed jolt of many millions of volts could theoretically destroy the communications network of any major city. Particle beam weapons and brain wave manipulation. Seifer had been intrigued by issues that emerged from his investigation. Particle beam weaponry was such a high-level secret that President Jimmy Carter, for example, was screened from vital technical developments by the bureaucracy of the CIA and Defense Intelligence Agency, according to General George Keegan, former head of Air Force Intelligence. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, was mentioned in regard to the Air Force Base's use of bright young geniuses to attempt a breakthrough in Tesla technology. Based on FBI files as well as other literature, Seifer concluded great support is lent to the hypothesis that Tesla's work and papers were systematically hidden from public view in order to protect the trail of this top secret work, which today is known as Star Wars. It was a paradox. Nikola Tesla's name was indeed invoked when describing proposed technologies that are as potentially planet cleansing as free energy, non-polluting power generation. At the same time, he was credited with inventing weapons which could be used for the Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, popularly known as Star Wars, and his wireless power engineering experiments may have led to a disaster in Siberia. Manning later learned from scientist Oliver Nicholson Tesla's love of nature seemed to be a contradiction to his desire to arrogantly manipulate it, to light up the sky. Over the next 9 years, she had the occasion to think about the deep frustration in Gregory's eyes as the Tesla conference, as he described the professor's attitude of, well, we'll just have to try it and find out. Meanwhile, one would-be god of the elements wasn't pulling any punches. A Texan, Dr. Bernard Eastland, aimed his sights high up to the ionosphere. In 1990, Gregory sent Manning a copy of a 1987 patent which cited Nikola Tesla under the heading Prior Art. He suggested she send for the audio tape of a National Public Radio interview with Eastland. Manning was astonished when she read the patent title, A Method and Apparatus for Altering a Region of Earth's Atmosphere, Ionosphere, and Magnetosphere. Whichever way she looked at it, the proposed high-power beaming of radio frequency energy into the upper atmosphere sounded insane. For example, the patent said the technology could manipulate global weather systems. Gregory had been sending her articles which indicated that electrical forces do affect the weather, so it came as no surprise. Now, I have to say, this book was published, let's see, copyright 1995. And this is a first edition, fourth printing, but why do we hear about global warming as if they don't understand what the fuck they're doing? Okay, I just have to put that in there. More horrifying, she remembered what a brilliant physicist by the name of Walter Richmond had written about a possible technology which sounded very much like Eastland's concept. The late Walter Richmond, an anthropologist, Leigh Richmond, wrote a book titled The Lost Millennium, using the novel format to get their ideas out to the world. A disastrous technology described as a solar tap in the book was startlingly similar to the aspect of Eastland's patent. Okay, give me a minute here, folks. Please bear with me. Okay, let's see, how many pages of this do we have? Oh, we're almost done. We're not too far away. Although ionospheric heaters beam power from antenna on the ground up to the ionosphere, and the Richmond's solar tap concept goes the other direction. Both involve connecting the Earth with the ionosphere. The novel described a solar tap that just wouldn't quit. It began from a technology that started on the ground, from which engineers beamed up a pathway for some of the ionospheric electricity to ride back down on. This planetary short circuit usually blew out in a fraction of a second. But one day the fictional engineers made a fatal mistake. They kept a solar tap going while a solar flare surged into the ionosphere and then to the ground via the ionized pathway of the tap beam. And the surge of power from the tap became an avalanche. An avalanche at the pole in the vertical plane of the planet's magnetic field, where the winds of magnetism would not rise to blow it out. 1 trillion watt seconds of energy unleashed their fury on the polar cap in the first flash. Even as it discharged, the ionosphere was recharged from the solar furnace. The first flash became a mighty roar that poured an increased and now steady stream of energy through the now stabilized short circuit. Kilocubit after square kilocubit of frozen wasteland boiled. Watt after watt of ever-increasing avalanche energy lit the polar cap with a glare that had never been seen before. Could such a disaster happen in real life? Manning reread the introduction to The Lost Millennium. It said that in 1962, Walter Richmond was researching atmospheric electricity and developed the theory of what the couple called the solar tap, a source of abundant power from the electrical current that exists as a potential between the ground and the ionosphere. The physics is exact. The power is there for tapping. Such massive amounts of power could be distributed by broadcasting it, which Nikola Tesla has proven could be done before 1911. The two scientists believed that automobiles, industries, and homes could be turned into broadcast power just as radios are tuned to certain frequencies. The bad news was that, unless carefully handled, broadcast power would resonate with the structural steel of buildings in a destructive way, Richmond said. Manning's attention was caught by the scientist's own life story. In 1963, the Richmonds took their research paper on the solar tap to President John F. Kennedy's science advisor. They planned to also take them to the United Nations Science Advisory Committee. Instead, they received a shock from their government. Our papers were placed under the secrecy label, Secrecy Act legislation, and we were offered a government contract for research, which we refused. It would have placed us under the secrecy syndrome, in which we had refused for some years to take part, Lay wrote. We were told to sit down and shut up in no uncertain terms. The vision of the fictional solar tap lingered in Manning's mind. The book described an experiment gone wrong that started an unquenchable avalanche of electrons. A character in the book said, "The power's there, enough to blow up this Earth itself if misused." Is this what the late Walter Richmond knew, that had to be placed on the Secrecy Act? If the electrical power of the ionosphere avalanched onto Earth in a continuous flow, his book's character said it would burn hell out of the spot where it touched Earth, empty the capacitors that's the ionosphere, and feed directly from the solar wind. Earth's an electrical motor. When the motor began to run wild, it would increase in rotational speed. Eventually, the Earth would explode from increased centrifugal stress. I have to stop there and just add this to somebody out there who's listening. Somehow in my mind, it pops up to me that there's places in Saudi Arabia, I believe, and maybe even here in America, where the sand seems like it's been blasted from space to turn into glass. I don't know. They say Atlantis, they did some weird stuff. Maybe this has already been tried once before for planet Earth. And maybe that explains why there is a federation in space. Anyway, that's all I got to say about that. Manning read the novel's description of the fiery, steamy, noisy destruction of the planet, a shock wave racing at the speed of sound, toppling great cities. Destruction continued for days, and the planet whipped about on its axis like a thing tortured. The Richmond's novel vividly raised questions about the wisdom of pulsating a radio frequency beam, which could make an ionized channel between Earth and the ionosphere. And in parentheses, and therefore electrically conducting channel between Earth and the ionosphere. Even if there were no danger of accidentally tapping into the ionospheric powerhouse and getting zapped in return, disrupting a part of the upper atmosphere violently is in itself a dangerous experiment. She later was told by independent scientists ionospheric heaters were nothing new. Manning had learned from articles sent her from Gregory. However, Eastland's invention made it possible to stab the ionosphere with a much more powerful and more focused beam. A few years later, Gregory telephoned and said in a choked voice, "The maniacs are actually going to do it in Alaska." The U.S. Navy and Air Force would be paying a contractor, Arco Power Technologies, to build a super powerful ionospheric heater, an array of antenna in the Alaskan bush outside of Anchorage. Over the next year, Gregory mailed her articles on ionospheric heaters and related topics, which he found in science journals dating back to the 1970s. He gave her the phone number for a man named Claire Zicker in Anchorage. Gregory became increasingly angry and pessimistic about the state of the planet's health, and eventually sent his entire file on ionospheric heaters to her. "I give up. I've written to everyone I could think of. You're a journalist. Do something with this." His words and thought of what he called mad science in our sky weighed on her, but she was again employed as a reporter for a daily newspaper in British Columbia City, and had no time for starting any campaign. One day she photocopied excerpts from the file, wrote an introductory page, and gave the package to the managing editor of the newspaper. He sent it to the newspaper chain's columnist in Ottawa, but the man never published a word about ionospheric experiments. In early 1994, she telephoned a reporter at an Anchorage paper. Gregory said the man was writing an article about the project that would beam so much power up to the ionosphere for military experiments. In a discouraged tone of voice, the reporter said that his editor was not interested in an investigative story of any depth about the project. The stance of the paper was that the military's infusion of money would provide jobs. Manning photocopied her now thick file on the topic of ionospheric heaters and electric weather forces and sent it to the reporter anyway. Her next call was to Claire Zicker a year later. She would be in Alaska interviewing him and others who were concerned about the Skybuster. as Dr. Richard Williams of Princeton had named the proposed superpower ionospheric heater. The sequence of events that took her to Anchorage began when Dennis Specht, an anti-nuclear activist then living in Alaska, sent a news item to an Australian magazine. And that's the end of chapter 2. So that's all I have on the reading today. But last night, there's been quite a few attacks still going on. We're still dealing with the morons who think they're gods. And I did a drawing. That's kind of how it looks when I look through my hag stones. That's how the auric field of the stones look to me, and I put those little lines in there. Those lines denote like there'd be color variation, and then that's to me how the stones, their auric field look. Now, one of you famous people who happens to watch in on me, when I close my eyes, sometimes I see things. And I doorbelled the guy. I couldn't remember your name at first. And I said, "You have a neighbor upstairs." And I did a drawing. If you have a neighbor, he's got long, stringy blonde hair. He's got a nose like that. And if your neighbor kind of looks like that, he was peering into your life. You were with a beautiful woman, and he was watching you with that woman and doing some kind of witchcraft at you. So here's what I want you to do. I'm going to just energetically, sometimes this does help with energy weapons, believe it or not, simple things, but you have to be focused and you have to know you have energy as well. We people, our hearts pump, blood flows. There's iron in our blood and other minerals and water. We're comprised of a lot of water. There's spaces in between, and we generate our own personal electricity, okay? Now, the formation of an X is very important in blocking energetic weapons and people looking in. Now, sometimes I do like this over my head, okay? They say we can pull down our veil of invisibility, or actually, it's like you're turning your aura into blocking you out. Okay, you just visualize that you're putting you're closing the door when you do this, and then you're pulling that shit down, block me out. Okay, and you got to think it, believe it, and energize it. Now, the other thing you can do so that people can't peer into your world, I'm going to demonstrate. What you're going to do is you're going to take this basic square formation, and this is only partial, like I'm showing you. You're going to build walls of X's around your space, okay? So what you're going to do is, it's going to look like this. So basically, got stuff on my floor. So you do this. And then I do the ceiling, the floor. I've done this so many times that I do my back without turning, but you could turn around and do your back. And then you do your sides and your sides. And then I bring a crescent space around, so I'm twirling it around, and I ask the angels to block it out, okay? That should help. Even if they've got some energy weapons, it'll make it hard for them to see into your world. I hope that helps somebody today. I hope you enjoy me reading the book. Remember, I think a lot of you are amazing. You are more powerful than you know. Be well, people. Bye now.